Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special Noon Speaks. Today, I'm delighted to say that we've got Minnie Driver joining us. If you are of the Noon vintage, Minnie Driver will need no explanation, as she's very much a queenager, just like the rest of us. And I'm really delighted that she's come to talk to us today because I've been absolutely loving her new memoir, which is called Managing Expectations. A great theme, I had to say, in my life, and particularly in my relationships with my parents, but we'll come on to that. And I just really I'm delighted to welcome her to Noon, because I remember seeing you on Graham Lawson quite recently and just thinking everything you said was just so on all the things that we like to talk about here. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh,
um,
thanks for having me. It's great. Yeah.
no, it's a great pleasure. So um, I was particularly interested in your memoir, Minnie, because you're kind of very much of a kind of similar London vintage and kind of or English vintage to me and to many of our members and listeners, and there were just so many things that really struck a chord in the book. And to those of you who haven't read it yet, I would really urge it, because I think it's not what you expect from a Hollywood memoir. In fact, you were saying that there's an extra chapter which has been added, which I haven't seen, which is about fame. But actually, what I really liked about it was that it was not about being famous.
Yeah.
It's very real, and I think it's really beautifully written. So tell us a bit about why you decided to write it, what your motivation was.
Well, it's largely because I've been telling other people's stories for my whole adult life, or being part of my parents' stories before that, and it felt like at this midway point in my life, or I hope it's the midway point, that I was really interested in telling my own stories, and it was fun, and I had the space and the time to do it during uh, COVID. I began it in the middle of 2020. So it started out that I'm a storyteller. Like, I don't really separate out all the different creative mediums that I work in. It's all comes from the same place. So it was just a further exploration, really.
And what I loved about it, I mean, it begins with a very kind of slightly running with scissors kind of evocation of your childhood, which I think will be maybe similar to quite a lot of us who went through what I call the 70s kind of divorce Olympics. My parents divorced when I was quite young, like yours. And I think almost my favorite passage in the book is this incredible description of you having this huge argument with your father in Barbados and then being sent back to England by yourself. Do you want to explain to the Noon community kind of
Wow.
what that was about?
Well, there were different people moving in and out of the landscape when your parents break up. Your parents have other boyfriends and girlfriends, but it wasn't, things weren't explained then in the way that, certainly the way that I would speak to my child if I were introducing a new boyfriend, or I wouldn't have my child meet a boyfriend until I was certainly sure that they were going to be my boyfriend. But that's not how they ran it in the late 70s, early 80s. So I was definitely a very emotional and very articulate child, and I was the sort of the helpful herald in our household of pointing out truths, whether people wanted to be made aware of them or not. So when my dad got a new girlfriend, who was a very nice person, but she was new and nothing to do with our life, and I took exception to that. And we had this big fight, and I don't even really remember the fight. I just remember my father telling me I had to apologize and my refusing. And he got so angry, he said I had to leave our house and go back to England. And he was so cross, and there wasn't a direct flight back to England that night. So he actually put me on a plane that sent me to Miami by myself, where I spent the night in one of the great raging, insanely terrifying and amazing hotels in Miami in the early 80s, this place called the Fontainebleau Hotel. And I stayed there by myself for a night and a day before I was put on the plane back to England. And I was 11. And it was quite an adventure. I mean, we sort of, our hair curls when we think about doing that now with our kids, but I guess back then, my dad was born in 1921. Like he was old school. He was like, get out now.
And I mean, I have to say, it really made my blood run cold. So,
Yeah, it's terrifying.
you get packed off to Miami. I mean, just thinking about the kind of possibilities for
I know,
what could have gone
I
wrong.
know,
I mean, there's
I
that
know.
terrible bit where you describe kind of going down to the cabanas and and kind of wanting some shade, and the pool guard saying, "Oh no, no, you can't go in there," and then a nice man, actually, as it turned out, coming forward and going, "Oh, you can come into my cabana." But I was reading that, and I was thinking, I remember I've got teenage girls of my own, and the idea of them being kind of on their own in Miami, kind of preyed upon by every possible paedophile going, you would have thought, would
Oh
just
yeah,
be
it was.
absolutely.
It was. It's absolutely hair raising when I think about it now. But I do remember at the time, I was just more. I was angrier. I was angry at the, it was I write about it in the book, like this idea of being in a hotel with this amazing swimming pool, which that hotel really has. And my association with hotels and swimming pools had always been familial and with my family and my sisters and playing and having a great time. And suddenly there I was in this amazing hotel with this huge pool with no one to play with, and this the whole wonder had kind of been ruined once again by the specter of my father and this punishment. And I felt enraged rather than in danger. And this,
Yeah, but I think what's so good about the book is that shift in perspective, how you can take things which should be fun, that like going to a hotel pool should have been really fun, but actually when you suddenly feel really unsafe, everything shifts on its axis, and I think that you capture that really beautifully.
oh, thank you very much. I think it's the child's eye view. You I could very quickly ascertain that something looked the way it had used to look and then suddenly looked different. And that vertiginous feeling that you have when you're looking at something familiar, but it's actually completely suddenly unfamiliar. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in that space and kind of what that looks like.
Yeah, well, I think it's where the kind of magic of transformation or shifts happen, isn't it? Is when you suddenly realize that you're in the same place, but it's different. I went for a walk the other day with a friend of mine whose husband was an artist who died recently, and she said to me that he always used to take the same walk in Regent's Park. They always followed the same route because he said that in the minuteness of kind of tiny differences where you notice things. So you would notice the blossom, you would notice the
Mm.
way the leaves had changed
Mm.
because you've done the same route the day before. And I think that there's something in that, isn't it? That in the familiarity, you can see that you see the difference. I've always thought was interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I think that is a very evolved and positive way of looking at any kind of the routine of the familiar. But there's also, a kind of black mirror aspect to when things look the same, but you fundamentally know they are not, and that there is a level of threat involved in them. Um, that that's I think that's the other side of that very positive exploration of um, the evolving familiar.
Yeah, and I think that one never gets that more than with one's own children. And I think particularly if you've had the kind of 70s childhood that you had, which by today's standards, we kind of look at it and we gasp. I think that sometimes you're only aware of, I've neglected is a strong word, but how kind of free range, let's put it in a less kind of we were as kind of 70s children, when you think about the contrast between that and your own parenting. Have you found that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. But I think it's like we were incredibly free range as kids, but there was also much less interest in our interior world. Like our parents were just, I guess they were busy just working out their own demons, but I'm I'm so much more interested in the interior world of my kid and like have set up that relationship with him. I mean, maybe it's also because I've been a single mother his whole life. Our conversations, like I've written down, I mean, I have a book's worth of conversations that I've been having with Henry since he could speak. Um, I'm familiar with his internal topography, and I know that him knowing that makes him feel safe in the world. And I see why he is so much more of a solid oak tree in this world than I ever was, is because of that he is known and he is seen. And I think I say it in the book. I really do believe that 90% of parenting is witnessing. The whole being, look at me, mummy, look at me on the swing, doing whatever thing that we are distractedly not looking at them doing. But that it is about, we are their first anchor to actually being here, to the reality of being here, and that being witnessed and being seen in all of your glory and awfulness is really what creates safety in a person. And I was
It's
very clear about wanting to create that for my kid, because I did not have that created for myself.
Yeah, and that's not just I mean, that's not just a kind of a theory of yours. That is actually a concrete theory of mind. My mother is a child psychologist,
Oh
and
yeah.
the way that children establish a sense of self, establish a sense of empathy, of intimacy, of feeling held, is being held in the mind of their parent. So
Mm,
the psychologists talk about it as mirroring. That what
mm,
you need to for your brain actually to develop is that sense that you're being held in the mind of somebody else. And so
mm.
you're completely right about that. It is what creates safety. It's what creates that sense of kind of love and bonding, and somebody having got you, is that total sense of when you think something, somebody else knows that you're thinking it, that you're being
Yeah.
held in somebody's mind all the time. That is what parents are supposed to do. I just think that there was a bit of a lack of that going on in the amazingly individualistic, kind of hedonistic world of the 70s, where I
Yeah.
think our parents were very much centered on their own kind of individual becoming, I think. And children were very much still in that Victorian thing, I think, a bit of kind of seen and not heard, a bit of an irritant, kind of slightly told to kind of go away while the adults got on with their stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was also because, like, they were, my my parents, my mother was the child of a Victorian. Like, my
Yeah.
grandfather was born in 1883. Yeah, which is bananas.
Mm.
So they were breaking out and reacting to kind of post-war everything 50s. That it really was that unlocking time for them. It was very not selfish, but just kind of socially, it was that way. People were exploring something else, and children didn't really, they could be part of that, but they certainly weren't going to be the main focus.
No, I don't think we were centre stage for our parents in the way that our children
No,
are for our
definitely
generation.
not. Definitely
Um,
not.
but what I also really liked about your book was how you came to terms with that, because I found incredibly moving the part at the end about the death of your mother. I'm so sorry, that's obviously quite a recent thing.
Yeah.
And the way that you had forgiven her, or kind of come full circle for some of those, maybe 70s parenting lapses.
Yeah, I mean, if you're lucky, you get to resolve those things as an adult with your parents. And one of the great things about my mother, who was as deeply flawed as the next person, and selfish, like, but no more than anyone else, was that she wanted to explore that with me. She wanted to heal that. We did have, huge um, conversations, and like we went to therapy once together in this one kind of mind-blowing 3-hour epic that was absolutely fascinating, because I got to really understand why she was the way that she was because of her own story. And her willingness to continue to show up for um, whatever damage had been incurred when I was a kid, like that's, I don't know, that's as good as we can do as humans. It seems to me, it's like, know that it's not going to be perfect, and be available to heal, rents that we might have created. Like that's really good humaning, it seems to me.
No, I completely agree. And I think as we get older ourselves, we start having to do quite a lot of that in our own lives, don't you? You realize the kind of the times when we haven't been kind of particularly perfect. I think particularly with teenage children, it often comes back. Yeah, your kind of your sins when they were younger kind of come back to bite you. And I think all you can do is go on, as you say, kind of keeping a channel open and doing your best and admitting that things won't be, things won't maybe weren't the most perfect, but that you can go on showing up and maybe trying to do better as you understand a bit more or can be a bit more compassionate.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That if it is some sort of relay, that we we keep paying attention to the stuff that is passed on. And I'm really interested in like the epigenetics and like what is inherited, but then how we, through our free will, we can always change that. You may have a certain set of patterning, but that's can always be added to or modified.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree that also becoming kind of attuned or conscious of the kind of patterning and what might be being passed on, you can then begin to change that. It's one of the things. I was talking to a good friend who's got a teenager who's really in trouble at the moment, and she was talking about how, as a family and in herself, she's had to really kind of go back to basics and kind of rework that. And I know from parenting my own teenagers that there are always times for that kind of reconnection, that it's not done, and that you can also do that with your own parents. I think that that's a really important lesson. I mean, a lot of us can get quite trapped in our childhoods, or the kind of sense of having been done wrong, or and I think it's very important at some point that you kind of jettison that kind of sense of resentment and move into actually where you are and take responsibility for some of the things that you do yourself and not blame it on other people.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey, that whole, because it's it's tricky to go, this happened and it was shit, but it does, I can accept that and know that they did this, but then continue to have a relationship, because here we are. And if we're constantly taking our coordinates for how we behave and interact with life from stuff that happened a really long time ago, we really do impede our own evolution. And I don't know what the point of us being here is. I really don't. It seems to me that it is a journey that, if you can be as present as possible in, you'll have kind of the greatest awareness of what that journey is. But if you're constantly being held by, or setting your course from these ancient coordinates, you may not get the full glory of the experience. But that also is a choice to do that.
I think so. And what we're really interested in Noon is this sense of a kind of shift and a becoming in midlife. And I was really struck by some new research. Well, we've done a big piece of research for Noon, which we called the rise of the queenager, which we like as a kind of more
It's
positive
great.
kind of
That's a great
framing
marker. I like that. Yeah.
yeah, the kind of positive framing of this time. And what really comes out of that is this sense that what from about 25 to 50, we're in what could be called the kind of age of achievement, that we're kind of ticking all the boxes that we've been kind of told that we're supposed to tick by kind of society, or that were programmed into us by our parents. And that actually by 50, you kind of, it's like you spat out the other end of that, whatever your choices have been. And it's at that moment where you kind of slough off all those expectations and all those things you've been doing, and you actually have a chance to become the person you're supposed to be. That by then you've kind of got rid of everybody else's expectations about what it's going to be like, and that kind of in midlife we become the women that we're supposed to be. And I love that sense of becoming, in a sense that at this point it finally becomes our time, that a lot of women have been looking after other people, or looking after children, or caring for parents. And what came out of our big piece of queenager research was just this sense in the women that they realize that it's this moment now, that there may be less time under the bridge than less time to come than there is already under the bridge. And if you're really going to do the thing that you wanted to do, this is the moment. Do you have a bit of a sense of that in your life?
Mm, I don't know that I do, because I don't. I never couldn't do this. Like, I was never married. I've never financially been supported by anyone except my dad up until the age of 17. And I feel the same terror and engine every single day that I have to provide, not only not for myself, for my kid. And
Mm-hmm.
that is never gonna, I can't ever see that going away until I'm much, much older. So really this idea of reaching this point of going, oh, I can take my foot off the gas and really explore who I am. It's like, no, you got to keep your foot on the gas, and you you are fully capable of examining who you are whilst also kind of going at 60 miles an hour. Um, and I've always felt that in a way, but I definitely feel more able to do that, to examine who I am and enjoy who I am more whilst doing this thing that I've always had to do. Plus, I have a partner now who's incredibly supportive and who really wants me to not worry as much as I do. But
Mm.
um, it's funny. I definitely feel the wisdom of this age and the wonder, and I love it, and I would not go back for, you know, however much I loved my arse and my tits then. I would not go back. I want to feel and think the way that I do now. But in terms of there being a kind of expansiveness and a relaxation, no, I actually feel like I don't have that watching my mum die made me feel like there isn't enough time. I have to,
Yeah.
and we
No,
just have to keep doing everything, but do it with as much joy as possible, because there's just no point in worrying about it, because it is just gonna be lights out one day. And don't let that frighten you. Let that galvanize you and make you go, even if all I'm doing today is walking the dog and looking at the little tiny shoots coming out of the tree, let that be a heavenly, amazing fucking day here.
no,
Um,
I think that that's actually kind of pretty similar to what I'm saying. I think that there's a sense now of kind of seizing, the kind of carpe diem, or the kind of, grasping the nettle, the kind of getting on with it. That
yeah,
there's no time. There's kind of there's no time to waste.
no,
I think
there
that
isn't.
you get to this point and you realize that you've got to get on with it, and that's what I mean about it, anything that you want to do. This
Do it.
is now a relishing kind of, every day. I completely agree about that, and I think that there's a much more of a profound sense of appreciation and kind of gratitude for lots of small things in one's life at this
Yeah.
point than there was when we were younger. But
Oh
also,
yeah.
but and also I totally agree about that sense of um I absolutely don't mean a kind of relaxation. I mean a kind of sense of kind of gripping and getting on with it, but also a sense of possibility in that now,
Mm,
or a kind of agency
mm.
about what that might be. I mean, I think maybe, unlike a lot of women, Minnie, you've had quite a lot of kind of self actualization and kind of control of your own life all the way along. I mean, I was really interested in the book that you didn't want to dwell on the things that maybe some of your fans might think that you were going to write about. I mean, there's not a single mention of Goodwill Hunting, or
Oh,
most
it's
of your.
in there is. It is in this chapter, which I'm really sorry was not. I was still I was still editing it by the time the galleys had to be printed. There is an absolute chapter about Goodwill Hunting, which was this inflection point in my life, and about fame as a whole, and the fact that it is, becoming famous. The opening line of that chapter is, becoming famous is like everybody else has taken hallucinogenic drugs and you're the giant dancing mushroom in their trip. And that's where it begins. And like, I really wanted to write from the purview of, this happened to just a regular person. I was just a normal girl. You can't you may want to seek fame. You can't possibly imagine what fame is like. You just can't. Maybe nowadays on the internet and you see what it looks like more, but back then, pre-phones, England, there wasn't any idea about imagining what becoming a Hollywood movie star was like at all. It was just beginning, just pulling the thread on this beginning to work and then watching this whole thing unfold and it start gathering speed until it got into a hyper speed whereby it is completely impossible to remain tethered to good choices and a real semblance of reality when you're moving at that warp speed. And you put into that this beautiful falling in love with a really, really wonderful person who is also very young. And then you have this extraordinary experience together, which then goes horribly wrong when they just end up doing what all 25-year-old men do, which is like be an asshole at some point. And nobody handled it well, but it was all so public, there wasn't any real way of it healing.
Mm.
So when I wrote about that, it was really from a point of love, not rancorous bitterness. I have nothing but love for like my young self at that time and for Matt Damon and the making of that wonderful film. You know, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Were there some really horrifically public things that no one in a breakup should have to go through? Yeah, there were. But that's just like one of my stories. You know, it's just a story.
And did you kind of consciously try and step away from that kind of Hollywood star life? I mean, it kind of feels a bit like that. It feels like that in the book. I mean, you end up kind of living kind of by the beach in Malibu and going surfing all the time, and you know, certainly the way that
Yeah,
you
but I mean,
construct your life now
I
doesn't look
do
like
that when I
something.
work. You know, I do that when I work anyway. I've been known to get home at 3 in the morning and go out for a surf. Like it's, I, I know I specifically chose to start doing television because I had a child and I didn't have a husband who was financially supporting me. And I knew that me going and making independent films, and I didn't want to take my baby out in a caravan around the world with me making scrabbling at making films. I needed to make regular money. So in as much as giving up being, and I don't feel like I ever gave up anything, I just transitioned into a far more, I still got to act, I got to make regular money, and I got to be, you know, I bought a house that was literally 10 minutes from the studio where I made my show, and I got to be with my son and raise him and take care of us. So I was never, I don't know. I don't know that I could have maintained the level of fame that I have. It's still pretty, it's still quite a lot, you know.
Mm.
So for that to have maintained the stratospheric white heat thing that some actresses do, I just don't think I have the mental I didn't really have the appetite for it. But also I didn't want my kid being part of that whole thing. I wanted him to have this as much of a normal life as possible. Um, and it's funny now that he's taken himself off to boarding school, and I have all this time. I have more time, which it's horrific being away from him. But you know, I'm doing now is making films again. It's really weird. So I don't know.
No,
It all
it kind of
come.
it comes full circle, doesn't it? I think I remember someone saying to me when my kids were little that actually that the bit of space when they are really little and they really need you is actually quite short, and so it was really important to
Yeah.
kind of be around in that time, and also but not to make too many really drastic kind of decisions about your life in terms of that bit because it was going to be quite a short time, and then you know they
It's
would
such
be
a
off.
short time, and so weirdly, like my life became about his life, with all the happiness. I mean, so happily, it became about that. I mean, I had to earn a living, but me going and sort of like exploring the deeper, you know, recesses of being an actor, like that just wasn't the focus. Like I was creative in so many other ways, but I just did not have a child to not let that be the thing.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. But do you think that there's a sense now that he's getting a bit more grown up and he's off at university that you become a bit more center stage again in your life?
I mean, yeah, but sort of unwillingly. Like, I'd much rather be with Henry. I'd much rather
Oh,
be, I mean, poor thing. It's just as well he's at boarding school. I would literally, I'm always like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Can we hang out? Do you want to play a video game? Like I'm constantly like his most annoying friend. He tolerates me really kindly. Um, it,
I,
it's it's
I think
great.
all of us with teenagers have that. They go from kind of wanting to hug you all the time when they're
He's so
little to
nice to me though. He's so nice to me. And when I'm like, can we just go for a walk and get food? Like I don't know. I think he still likes me. I know he still likes me. And I do try and like give him his space, but it's great that he's gone off to this incredibly creative school to go and do everything independently but safely, find out who he wants to be. And I have all of this time and this space, which I mean, I don't have any time or any space at all. Like every single second is filled up with stuff. And I'm getting used to this new version of my life, sort of more without him, which makes me incredibly sad. But whenever I've been sad, I get creative. So that's I think that's part of what my whole journey in this life is. It's like you utilize the hard moments, you turn them into something else.
And yeah, there certainly seems to be lots of that in the book. I think that the certainly the piece about losing your mother is really beautifully done. Um,
Thank
and I
you.
think that there is a lot of loss in the children kind of becoming teenage and kind of growing up. My eldest went off to university last year, and I was just before she went, I was just in floods of tears for weeks. She thought I was completely pathetic when I took her up there. I had to kind of wear my sunglasses inside because I was crying so much. I knew that she was going to be deeply ashamed of how upset I was. It's kind of
Yeah, it's very hard. It is very, very hard. Nobody tells you about that. It's all about letting go.
yes.
Parenting is about letting go. Um, and being a child in a way is about that as well. So and ultimately that when you let go of your parents, if you're lucky enough to be present with them when they die, which it is, the hardest privilege. Um, you realize that's so much of life. It's just having the grace and the strength to let go and allow whatever the next moment is, to let that shine, to let that be, and to allow for evolution, even and particularly through death, and see that as a transition into we don't know what, but it is a transition. It is more akin to birth than anything I've seen, having given birth, been born, and watched my mother die. um I've my faith in, I'm sure that it is a transition into something else. That is what I've learned from witnessing it.
Yeah, there's a sense in both of those things that you're really kind of sitting on the astral portal, aren't you? That there's people coming and people
Something
going.
it's gateways. It's you. We may not know what that is, and you don't even have to use triggering words like God or source energy or the universe or whatever, but it is something. It is something else. I watched her be born into something else. I just don't know what that is, and I miss her so much, and I wish she could tell me what it is. But I think that's probably the point, is that it's experiential. um but she gave me she gave me so much. um she gave me so many gifts, which I fully intend to pass on to my child and hopefully grandchildren, or anyone who becomes your friend, you hope to pass that kind of love on to.
No, I think that's really true, and we know in our noon community that the death of a parent, death of somebody close to someone is actually something that's happened to. I mean, by the time you're 50, all of us have lost
That
someone
one,
that
yeah.
we really loved. And I think that we don't really talk as a society. I think we're very bad about talking about death. And
We don't
I
talk
think that
about
we
it at
don't
all.
really talk about what those moments are like, what it's really like to be there with somebody when they die, and why that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, it is the same. I mean, I write about that in the book, that you it's akin to birth, in as much as when you're dying, it's like when you're giving birth, you need somebody with you. If you can have someone to lean on, someone to help you feel safe and to know that you're not alone. um someone to kind of laugh with in the bits in between, because it's not a clear linear line to either being born or dying. And to do for that person what you know they would do for you, which is to just take you as far as they possibly can, or you take them as far as you possibly can, and then you're just standing there on the dock waving them off madly, jumping up and down and yelling and smiling your I love yous, and that's what they take with them. And that's the most that we can do, is walk with someone right to the very edge, and then they have to do the last bit. They have to push that baby into the world. They have to take the step into death and whatever that is. But we can go with them right to the very edge.
And I also completely agree that in being with them right to the very edge and really feeling that you've done everything that you possibly can to help them make that transition, there's also a great kind of, I think that there's a huge healing in that. I did that for my stepfather when he died. I was with him all the way through, and kind of, and there, you know, really when he died, and I had an amazing sense of, not exactly satisfaction, but a kind of cleanness, a sense that I really had done everything that I could have, that I'd said everything that I wanted to say, that it felt kind of, you know, kind of quite done in a really good way. I didn't have that horrible feeling of, oh, I wish I'd said that. I think if you really are there and that you really kind of hold them through, then there's also a real healing in that, even though you really miss them when they've gone.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I think one is very, very lucky to have that sense of completion, and that's part of the privilege I think that I talk about. But yeah, it doesn't diminish how much you miss them. But there's obviously, like, there's the best version of a difficult event.
Yeah, and I think there's comfort in feeling that you did everything you could, and that you were there for them. And I think particularly if it's a parent, in the same way that they were there when you came into the world, that you're there to see them off. There seems to be a kind of a real rightness in that.
Yeah, you just need to really take care of them. I mean, in the way that they take care of you as a baby. That really is an exchange. It is, the baton gets passed back, and you really have to take care of them. I mean, with my mother, um, she died in an NHS hospital, and they just there isn't the staff for somebody to sit with them all the time. So you do have to go and move in. I slept in the hospital. My sister would arrive. I would go home and have a shower and sleep for an hour or two, and then come back. I mean, she was never alone, and you realize that is so. I think that is so important, that somebody has somebody with them if they possibly can. Obviously, it's not always possible, but I was very grateful that that's how it went.
No, I think that's really important, and I also think it's really important that we talk about it, because
Mm.
otherwise people don't really know what to expect in those kind of circumstances. And for lots of people, it's not till a parent dies or something like that that they've actually been through any kind of bereavement. And I think as a society we don't have much of a model of what a kind
Don't.
of good death can look like.
I wish that I had worn black for this year, which I realize now is an identification marker, an identifying marker for other people to know. This is why I am like this. This is why I cry spontaneously in the middle of the street. This is why I can't bear talking about it sometimes, and sometimes it's all I want to talk about. It's why um, I won't call you back, or why I don't smile at you in the street, or all these. I suddenly realized that it's we. I wish that we could have a signal to show in that year, and it's more than a year, but a year is a good amount of time whereby all of your friends and acquaintances, people know that you are still in this state, that you haven't just suddenly. I got so angry with someone the other day who um we I without going into it too much, it was sort of this assumption that I was now over it and fine. And I got so cross, poor thing. Um, because they didn't have the understanding. They hadn't lost anybody. They didn't realize that it wasn't like a thing that timed out at a certain amount of months, that you must suddenly be over that. And now you can just laugh merrily at all the good things. And I think grief is so underestimated. And I really get that Victorian idea of wearing black, or the Jewish tradition of covering mirrors for while you sit shiva. Like, we don't have enough ritual around grief and death that help people understand that, one, it's important for ourselves, and two, it's important for other people to know that we're experiencing this huge thing, this seismic shift in our consciousness, and that we are going to behave differently as a result of that.
Yeah, and it's also a kind of warning to those around to kind of tread carefully, isn't it? The
Yeah,
kind of the black
be
owl band
gentle.
or the
Yeah,
widow's weeds. It was a kind of a kind of a society signifier that you needed kind of special, to kind of
ah,
handle carefully
yeah,
almost. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and I think that that's so true. And I also think that if you've been through that, when somebody else is in it, that they might want to talk about it, or
or they
that you
might
can
not.
open it up and say, look, if you want to talk about it, I'm here. And I think maybe the British are particularly rubbish about this, but there are so many people who are so kind of embarrassed to
Yeah,
kind of
feel.
get into it, or they
Yeah,
kind of go, how are you, and all you kind of know that all they want you to say is that you're fine,
that's absolutely
that,
true. That's
and if you're
exactly
and if
right.
you're not fine, and you actually go, well, actually, I'm feeling really awful, I've had a really bad weekend, or I've been really kind of crying my eyes out all night, then they just look at you in absolute horror, as if they don't know what to do with that information at all.
Yeah, that is exactly right. Um, but
So,
that is also, um, I don't accept cultural norms anymore. I, you know, I'm honestly, it's interesting having lived for 26 years in America, and now I'm back in England, sort of not quite half the year, but I really feel intolerant of what are kind of received cultural norms. It's like, I think we should call stuff out that we don't think is appropriate, that we should speak up where maybe traditionally that isn't acceptable. Um, uh,
give us some examples. Which ones would you particularly like to throw out?
well, I just like because it was me in Waitrose when my mother died, and when I just been told that she was definitely going to die quite, imminently.
Mm.
And had this trolley full of food, and I'd kind of sunk onto my knee, and I was holding onto the trolley, and there were literally people moving around me, leaning over, going, "Excuse me," as they were getting their tin of bird's custard or their bag of flour, and nobody stopped. Nobody stopped except an East Asian woman who worked at Waitrose. Um, she stopped and she put her hand on my arm, and she asked me if she could help me. She didn't ask if I was all right, because I was clearly not all right. She asked if she could help me. And it was such in my, the invisibility that British people have when they're showing emotion in public. She didn't see that invisibility. She saw me. And the other day I saw a girl crying in the street, and I went up and and I put my hand on her arm, and she was it was extraordinary. It was like, it was, she couldn't believe someone had seen her.
Mm.
And we stood and just talked. I think it must have been very strange, because like, she was really crying, and then she recognized me, and then she was horrified that she recognized me, and then she was overwhelmed by what she was experiencing, and we just stood there talking for about 10 minutes. um, and I think these moments of human interaction, I think we have to pay attention to the world that we're in. It's like the way that we drive on the roads with all of our entitlement, or the way that we bustle along the street like, my busyness is so much more important than yours, or the way that we don't stop when someone is in pain, because we're also in pain. We don't want their pain to make us have to deal with our own. Stop, be kinder. drive more kindly, stop when the person is clearly sobbing in the middle of the street, you know, be a better human.
No, I think that's totally right, and it's but it's often I had that I was in Tottenham Court Road station, and I came out and had a really similar thing of a girl who was in floods of tears, and I went over and I did the same thing. I put my hand on her arm and I was like, "Are you okay?" Or is there anything I can do? And she was so kind of taken aback. Same thing that people had obviously been walking past her for ages. She almost kind of didn't know kind of
Mm.
quite what to do with that. But I think you're right that more random acts of kindness and connection are definitely required.
Yeah, I think it's like it's also like reaching out to someone again with the expectation that they might go, "No, I'm fine. Leave me alone." But I still think that reaching out is better than ignoring it. I just do. I think
No,
it's better to reach out and then have some stranger reject you. But but because because I don't think there's enough reaching out. And I think it changes you. I think kindness is incredibly is incredibly powerful.
no, I completely agree with that. And what else do you notice coming back to Britain after so long? Being more based in America. Are there things that you like about being back? What are the main differences for you?
I really like walking in. I really love the countryside in England. I really do. I love it. I love the nature here. I've never loved cities ever.
Mm.
I've never even lived in Los Angeles. I don't live in the city. I live in this far-flung village pretty much by the sea. Um, so it's interesting being in a city. It's fun being around people who are like me rather than being the alien. Um, but I also find it I do find like the driving here is monstrous. The roads are monstrous. I it's so horrible driving in London. It's like they just so don't want you to drive here, which clearly they don't want you to have a car and drive here. And yet, instead of that informing the way the cars people buy or the way they drive, it's just like they all then went out and collectively bought Range Rovers, which are even harder to negotiate, and then got attitudes that are the size of their cars. And it's just the whole thing is impossible. Every day it feels, if I take my car out, which I very rarely do, feels like I'm going to war.
Yeah.
It's loathsome driving in England.
No, I
In America, when
understand.
I go back and it's like these big freeways, and like there's just like so much space, and like I'm in my car, and like people wave you on, and like it just feels so nice. And it's horrific. Driving in England and in London, particularly, is a realm of hell that Dante would have written about.
No, I know what you mean. It's that kind of total, like, kind of elbows out, kind of grabbing all space for
It's
themselves. Like,
astonishing. And it's like everybody believes that they are righteously deified to behave just as they please and fuck everybody else. It's so unpleasant. So I've really noticed that coming back, but I sure do love going to the pub with my friends, and I do love finding places that I didn't know when I lived here, because I really wanted to get away from England and London, because I was really young and I was off on an adventure. So it's really lovely rediscovering it.
so there's a kind of circularity there too, of kind of coming back. And you coming
Yeah,
back
which
because
is
you're
which is horrific as well, because it makes you feel like, have I actually evolved at all, and did anything change? And am I really back where I started? But I'm not. And I think you have to create a different relationship with the place that you're sort of from if you come back to it. But I'm I think at this point, I'm not an American. I'm a Californian.
right. What,
That's the
because of all
thing.
because of the kind of conflicts within America.
I think it's. I think no. It's just because of the Pacific Ocean and the fact that I swim in it every day of the year if I'm there. I surf every day. Um, I live my life sort of outside and in the light. And it really is as simple as that. It's like coming back to England, like the winter here, it was so astonishingly difficult. It being dark at 3 p.m. and sort of calibrating to that and not being able to jump in a body of water every day. I mean, I tried. I do have swum in the Serpentine and I do swim in like rivers and things, but it's it's much. I live right on the ocean, so it's obviously just different.
Yeah, I
Just
can see that the Hampstead Ladies Pond doesn't quite cut it after
I
you've
love
been
going there
in the
actually, and I
In the
do, and
Pacific.
I strip off with everybody else, and I jump in and swim in a circle at the ladies' pond. I love it there, but it is different swimming in live water in a live
Yeah,
ocean. It is different, but I'll swim in anything. I
yeah,
mean,
no, me too. I can totally understand that if you live next to the sea, that kind of being here is not so great. So are you back here because your son's in school?
yeah, 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 100%. I just, and even though he doesn't always want to come home on weekends because he's at boarding school and he's having a great time, I just need to be nearer him. Um, but I'm away working quite a lot, so it's a whole new set of considerations, really. But it's interesting. Yeah.
And how else? I mean, given that we're a kind of midlife female community, have you got any kind of other pearls of wisdom for the women about kind of being this stage, or about how to kind of feel your best, or what makes you feel good about being in midlife?
I really think it's like really clearly seeing all of the ways in which you know I so clearly see the rules that were set up by men that I thought I had to play by and did. And actually there wasn't really any other thing. Like you couldn't in my business unless you played by the rules. You couldn't get ahead. Um,
What kind of rules? What kind of rules do you mean?
Shutting up, not talking about revolting working conditions and toxic behavior or sexual assault, not talking about that stuff, but just getting on with it, talking to your girlfriends about it and just going, oh, that's just how it is. I wish there was something we could do, but there isn't. Off we go. I think right now, women really looking at the things that they might not realize are systemic in their life that they actually could affect change around and go, well, just because I've always done it this way, or I've been told this is the way that it's been done, is that actually true? I think it's about really interrogating things that we've done or been expected to do and challenging them if we don't think they actually serve us, or if we think perhaps there's a better way of doing it or of interacting
Were
with it.
you aware of doing that kind of during your career? I mean, there's quite a striking part in the book where you talk about going for an audition where you were kind of made to do a kind of when Harry met Sally kind of orgasm, and you kind of said, I don't think so, and then they said you were difficult. Were you aware that if that challenging that rather kind of sexist um, way paradigm was dangerous? And do you
Yeah,
think it's different now?
I mean, a bit, but not much.
Not
I mean, I
much, yeah.
think I think it's a bit different, but I don't think it's much. I think that there's a lot of kind of performative, oh, we're scared that we'll get done if we don't make some allowances for some sort of version of HR for women. But I think it's better than it was. But yeah, I was absolutely penalised for speaking out. Absolutely penalised. In as much as like studios would give stories to newspapers about my being difficult, when in actual fact I was pointing out stuff that was absolutely inexcusable, and that I was a woman being treated differently. There was a movie that I made where I wasn't allowed to wear a wetsuit underneath. It was everybody was wet in the movie, and I wasn't allowed to wear a wetsuit under my costume because you couldn't see my breasts.
Oh,
And I made a stink about that and
yeah.
was roundly punished, was vilified and blacklisted by a particular producer for a long time because of that. And it's like, that I don't think is happening today. I think women speaking out now, people are listening. When women say stuff, they're I think they are being listened to more. There's more
And do you,
records now.
and do you think that those that the kind of, if you read the kind of terrible things that happen to young actresses, that's kind of some of the kind of Harvey Weinstein stuff or
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Do you think that that's still going on?
I have no idea. I certainly hope not.
Or do,
I've got to imagine that it's not happening with the same abandon. I don't think it is. I mean, I think there's always going to be stories. There'll always be stories of people in power, of it coming to light that they abused that power. I don't think that's ever going away. That is time immemorial. But I would hope that that within my business, that particular culture is done. I mean,
and
I really
are you seeing more women kind of behind the camera, women producers? Is there more of a female lens on the kinds of movies that or kind of programs that are being made? I mean, I was chair of women in journalism in the UK for 10 years, and we were very interested in the kind of the lens that was being put on the kinds of stories that made the front pages in terms of very male choices about what made the front pages, what a story was, what
sure.
kind of women were shown. Do you think that there's any sense of a shift in that, or a meaningful shift in that
I
in
think
Hollywood?
so. I mean, I think when you look at, um, what's her face, Maggie Gyllenhaal and gorgeous Rebecca Hall, like Oscar nominated movies this year. Chloe
Jane
Zhao won
Campion.
Best Director the year before. Like, yeah, I think that there is definitely a much more female forward purview in filmmaking. I really do. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see there be more training programs for women. Like the reason that there aren't enough female filmmakers is because like women just aren't haven't been trained in the same way or given the same opportunities that men have. So I'd love to see those kind of programs continue to expand and see more and more women in all different departments.
And are there more kind of female producers? I mean, we think of kind of Reese Witherspoon here, or things like Mayor of Easttown, or I mean, I've been interested to see a certainly more roles for women kind of in midlife displaying kind of agency, not being the victim or the arm candy, but actually kind of carrying a program themselves or
Yeah,
kind of
I
directing it.
think
Do
there's
you see more of that?
yeah. I mean, yeah, yeah. I think that commissioners have got to put their money where you know they're putting their public mouths are. They're saying a lot of stuff about we really want a lot more female content, and then they're not necessarily, giving you the money to do it. But I mean, you can see what's on television. I mean, it's like I feel like there's more female content than there's ever been. Um, I I think that I wish that there were more female filmmakers.
And do you feel like you get the kind of roles that you want, that you're being offered more interesting roles, not necessarily just the roles where they want to see your nipples kind of under your wetsuit, without the wetsuit? I mean, do you think there's
Well,
more of
it's been a long time since I think I've been perceived in that way. Yeah, I mean, I think I get really I get really interesting roles. Um, I've loved the stuff that I've done recently, and I've got two really beautiful films coming out this year. So, yeah, yeah, I think I do.
Yeah, because it just always used to. I mean, I've spent the last 25 years interviewing actresses and things for the Sunday Times, and every actress you ever interviewed would go, "Oh, there aren't any roles for kind of for middle-aged women, or there aren't films which are highlighting kind of female experiences, or where the kind of woman is really kind of driving the plot." Do you think that that is shifting in a meaningful way?
Well, in Hollywood, it's like you've there's maybe like only a few actresses who can really get financing on a film that is a
Mm,
purely female purview made.
yeah,
It is tricky. It is tricky because it's like if you don't have if you like financiers will take a chance on a man who they don't know as well than a woman that they know well but isn't one of maybe five actresses. Like that still completely exists. But I think the development of more female based stories is happening. It really is just about, whether we're really going to see them up on the screen. That remains to
Yeah,
be seen.
no, I mean, it's the same with the funding of female entrepreneurs. So there are now like women of around our age are becoming entrepreneurs at a higher percentage rate than any other demographic, and yet only 2% of venture capital funding
Yeah,
goes to
right,
women. I mean, I think it's
right.
often a case of follow the money. So I'm just interested whether the kind of the Me Too movement, the kind of the lip service, the
It's
success of
glacial.
some
It's
female
it's
producers
it's
actually
like
shifts the dial.
it's a glacial pace
Yeah.
that it shifts. And if I feel like there's a lot of companies, and that's across the board, that if they can make it a performative change rather than a systemic one, they'd rather do that. But it's up to us to keep developing. Like, I'm developing a ton of stuff. Like, it's up to us to do that, and then to insist, um and to then insist that people make these shows, make these movies.
I mean, I think another thing that's important in that equation is actually the kind of financial clout of our demographic. So I don't know if you know this, but in 2019, women over 40 started earning more money than women under 40 for the first time in history, as they stayed in their jobs and things during the kind of child rearing years. And also, nearly 30% of university educated Gen X women don't have children. So there's a real shift going on in terms of the
Interesting.
kind of financial kind of clout of what we call the queenagers. That they spend 250% more than millennials. They
Yeah.
they they command a huge kind of financial premium, and we're also the ones who are often paying the Netflix subscription or all those kind of things for our children. So I also think that there's maybe something to do in the kind of they're kind of motivating, and they're kind of getting slightly more militant as older women about the kinds of things that we want to see and voting with our wallets.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean, I think it takes a while for that to take effect. I mean, because it's certainly true.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, it has been true for a while, but I think this one of the things that we're trying to talk about at Noon also is to try and change the narrative around the later parts of women's lives to
Hmm.
one which is kind of more optimistic and looks at all the kinds of things that women are capable of here, and the kind of the way that that's changing. Because as a journalist, I certainly didn't feel that the kind of most of the stories that were being told in the media about what women 50 plus were getting up to in any way reflected the lives of the women that I was seeing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's certainly true. And there is also, it's just like, it's hard when you're pushing against the narrative that, like, 50 is old and done, and that a woman, once she's gone through menopause, like that whole sort of the whole lack of fecundity, like that you are just sort of a dried up husk, like that idea is really difficult. It's really difficult to kind of to hold that, and to know that you're now part of that idea, and then also change it, and know
Mm.
that you have to be part of the changing it. You can't just be like, well, that's just how people, men, see us, and young women see us, and that's just what we've got to do. But it's really, because it's really deeply ingrained. I have it in myself. Like, I can't believe I'm 52. Like, that number just, I know all of my attachments to what that number is. And I haven't been through menopause yet. So I haven't even been through that. So it's it's really society has done a number on our brains, and I think the way in which we um, have to reprogram ourselves, and then, as women have ever done, teach and reprogram everyone else, men.
Yeah, no, I think also younger women. I mean, the reason I set up Noon was that I want my younger daughters to, they're teenagers now. I want them to look forward to being 50 as the point where they kind of come into their prime, where they can really do all the things that they wanted to do. And I don't think that that's a narrative that we're shown at all in our society. And yet I see lots of women really coming into their prime and doing amazing things at this point, but we're not
It
telling
is,
their stories.
yeah, it is. It is the youth of old age right now. And
Mm.
that is a real, I mean, that's a Mark Twain thing or something or other, some paraphrase, whatever. But it's really true. It's, and as my mother always said every day, she's like, I'm as young as I'm ever going to be again. So that's that's fucking great. Today
Yeah.
I'm not old. Today I'm as young as I am ever going to be again in my life. So whatever your ideas around youth, just carry on taking all of that energy with you into all of it. And rather than the idea of fear and being used up. So interesting because women really are just so much more powerful. Like all our testosterone levels kind of rise and post
Mm.
menopause, and we literally we just pass men like that. Men's it's declining, and women's it's rising, and they really are. We are literally physically coming into our own, even as bits are falling off.
I like the description of us as kind of as autumn queens at this point, and that's why
Yeah, I
I
like
like the
that. Autumn
queenagers.
Queens. Queenagers is really good though. I love that. I want that on a t-shirt. Have you made
Good.
t-shirts of that? Have you? You must. You must make them and sell them.
Yeah, I know we're going to do noon queenagers t-shirts. So I'll send you one when we get them. Will you wear one?
Oh my God. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I might just have to, I've got a silk screen. Like I might have to make my own Queenager, but I'll totally tag you. I will tag you when I take the picture of it because it's really good.
I think it's really good. I think it's
It's
everything that
brilliant. You
I've
need to
done as a
trademark
journalist
it.
is trying to kind of create that, create a new kind
So
of
good.
zeitgeist. And I just think it's so important that this is a phase that people look forward to, and also that just that our kind of power at this point is recognized. I mean, I think the reason it isn't is because a lot of men are really quite scared by it. I mean, I'm interested in this idea that women at queenager point become less pleasing. We become less pleasing because we become a bit more bolshy because the testosterone goes up. And I think we become less pleasing kind of physically. And the combination of the two, the men really don't like it. And we see so many women being, evicted from the organizations that they've worked for, or kind of as they come into a small kind of
Yeah.
stroppy mode, the world then tries to dismiss us. And that's what I'm really trying to campaign to change.
Yeah, I hear you. I agree. I think, but I've, I think men are utterly terrified, really deeply of women. Like we make people. We
Yes.
make people in our bodies. Like it's if you described it and you wrote a scene around it, it would look like a superhero
Yeah.
Marvel movie. We make people. That's very that must be very threatening to someone who's meant to be the big strong kind of creator when it's like no 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 you're you're the big strong protector of the big strong creator. Like it's really funny how the wires really got crossed, like the incredible power and the celebration of women. In a way I think it had to be oppressed because it was too threatening to too many men. And I
Yeah.
really believe that's the sort of fundament of the patriarchy. It's like, no, 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 we have to turn them into chattel immediately because they're far too powerful and clever if left to their own devices, and don't let them all band together either.
Yes.
So, I mean,
Look,
I really believe that there's a lot of reprogramming of dudes.
no, I think that that's really true. And it's also, I mean, 2000 years ago, we had 2000 years of patriarchy. But actually, prior to that, it was all about the female goddess. You're right, the man was the protector. It really hasn't been like it is now. And hopefully we're beginning to shift out of that. But it's all, I always say when I talk about this, that it's only women only got the vote 100 years ago, that we're very much at the beginning of this process of a shift out of patriarchy. And we've seen it very much in our lifetime. If we think about the kind of norms of the kind of 70s, I was born in 1970, and how there's been a shift away from that. I think that's really important, and it will keep coming. But we have to understand that it's really not done. We're still very much in a process.
Yeah, it is glacial for sure. The pace of it, I think, as it becomes kind of, you know, less socially normal as well to see kind of much older men and abusing their power over younger women. I think then women become more empowered. They start going, well, I don't need to associate myself with a man in order to be powerful. So by the time they get to being 50, they're like, yeah, of course I'm powerful. I've always been powerful. Which is That's really what I hope for the evolution of girls, that they don't feel that there's a kind of, that there needs to be a sexual approbation over somebody more powerful than them in order for them to feel powerful. So they have to please somebody else in order to feel empowered.
Yes. No, I think that that's really important, and hopefully begin to change. Well, particularly in the way that we educate boys. I'm sure that your
Yeah,
son,
yeah,
having been kind of grown up with you, will have a very different kind of set of ideas. And I do see more of a leveling out. I hope in the next generation.
yeah. I think so. I think there's just a lot more awareness of the way in which Henry's not there certainly isn't the same kind of heteronormative boys versus girls vibe in his class. It's kind of like smartest person answers the question.
Yeah.
Boy, girl, well, fair amount of non-binaries in at his school, non-binary people. So I think that's as that normalizes, as that typicalizes, um, and the way that children sort of, I don't know. I think it looks like it's changing to me.